So whenever we consider planting and growing a plant, we should consider the native environment it comes from. Let's do that. Tomatoes are native to South America. In fact, several species are still found growing wild in the Andes. Brought to Mexico, tomatoes were domesticated and cultivated there by 500 BC. It is thought that the first cultivated tomato was small and yellow. Columbus and/or Cortez brought tomatoes to Europe, and Spanish explorers took them throughout the world. The tomato became popular in Spain by the early 17th century, where it thrived in the Mediterranean climate and became a staple food. When first introduced in England at the end of the 16th century, it was thought to be poisonous. The tomato belongs to the nightshade family. Some plants in this family are poisonous. This is also called the Solanaceae family. Finally, by the mid-18th century, the tomato had gained acceptance and was widely eaten in England and North American colonies. Studies have shown that Italians live longer on their diet, which includes plenty of tomatoes, olive oil, and red wine. The nutritious tomato is low in calories but high in vitamins A and C and potassium and the valuable antioxidant lycopene. Older tomato cultivars, also known as heirlooms, are not always smooth-skinned, but may have bumps or ribs, and are not always red, but sometimes yellow, orange, pink, purple, or black, and many other colors. These old cultivars have a delicious tomato flavor you cannot find in commercially bred tomato varieties purchased in the grocery store. Stupis, a favorite of ours from Czechoslovakia, or Bella Naliv, a John Austin pick from Russia, are two good heirloom tomatoes to try in your garden. The Western Hemisphere is not the only origin of corn, potatoes, and tomatoes, but also squash and pumpkins. Carrots, probably purple at first, were from Afghanistan. Beans are thought to have been found in both the Western Hemisphere and the Mideast. Onions have been cultivated in Asia for thousands of years. Wild onions were used by Native Americans. Broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage didn't occur in nature at all, but were bred from kale, although those did come from the Mediterranean season. So, when you plant your vegetable garden next spring, think about where those seeds come from and the history that has gone into getting them to you. Well, now this is an article from cashmynursery.com. I was really just looking for a basic background on tomatoes, but there you go. So it's something we need to always consider whenever we plant a seed or try to grow a plant. What is its native environment? What is it like for an environment natively? And then we do our best to mimic that environment and give that plant the best potential to express its genetics to the fullest. All right. So we're back here to talk about tomato quality again. This will be part 2 of the series on growing quality tomatoes. Well, we kind of just did an introduction last time, but it's time to dive in. So let's distinguish some basic principles. Number 1, if you want to grow consistent quality tomatoes and you want good yields, the number 1 thing you have to do from the very, very beginning of the whole process is select good seed. Depending on where you're growing, whether you're on a farm in a commercial setting, or whether you're in a garden on a small scale, or whether you're somewhere in between, like a market garden or a greenhouse, or in this example here, we're in a grow tent. Depending on your scale and setting, that will dramatically drive what seeds you select. And furthermore, the environment that you're working in will also drive that. So there's lots of pieces to this. So what you want to do is figure out what you want to end up with for a tomato, what your ideal tomato, what the big, hairy, audacious goal in your head is for the best tomato you could grow, and then work backwards from that. So like, for example, I love a good beefsteak tomato, like these black creme tomatoes that are not quite ripe yet. So I put some black creme tomatoes in, because I know I like those. And I also know they'll grow well in this environment, and having grown lots of large beefsteak tomatoes, I know how to support them nutritionally. So it starts with good seed. So let's just compare a couple different seed options, and I'll show you why you don't buy crap seed in the superstores, why you get good seed from good seed suppliers. So let's start with example number 1 here. These are San Marzano Roma plum, allegedly. This is like a standard seed packet on the shelf. It's supposed to be mature 76 days after set out. Claims to be indeterminate. So I've grown lots and lots and lots of these and never had, I mean, I've gotten decent yields out of them, you know, like in a good nutrition program with lots of love and care and a good amount of work as compared to other varieties, I would say. You can grow successfully these, right? But you still end up with this fairly small tomato, and if you want to make large amounts of sauce, or you like bigger tomatoes, or you want to do something really cool with it, what you want is more volume and more yield, but you want that in the nutrient density, right? So here's a seed that I've selected to use. So here's a different example of a Roma plum tomato. And these are from Italian seed company, Seeds of Italy. And there was another version of this that I got from the same company. This is a Pomodoro Scatolone. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. I'm not Italian. But you can see that, you know, even in the seed packet, you see a much higher quality. This is a really expensive seed packet to make. They come in a foil wrapper inside the packet, so the seeds are protected. This is a quality produced seed from a quality genetics. You know, like all the way, checks all the marks, right? This is a good starting point for a seed. And so, what I'll do here in this series, because now we have some historical data, I don't have these, the Pomodoro Scatolone, but I have the San Marzano Cella Redorta Romas from the same company. And they didn't have those in stock, or I would have bought those seed again. Unfortunately, I lost all those seeds when I moved to Canada because I couldn't take seeds with me over the border without a concern about interrogation, searches, etc. And as it turned out, I did get interrogated for 2 hours, but because I didn't have anything contraband-wise with me, they had to let me through. So, August 24th, 2019. So here we are in the Romas. I've discontinued foliar feeding these, so these did not get fed last night. These over here I'm going to continue feeding. These are doing much better. They don't have quite such an advanced potassium deficiency as these do. So these I'm either going to come through tomorrow or Monday and harvest out all the ripe ones, and we'll let them finish out, but we're not going to continue feeding them. But these other ones, these are the San Marzano Redorta Italiano something or other. It's a pretty long name. But these tomatoes are massive, super meaty, and super delicious. And I just wanted to get you a close-up here. Apologize for the rough camera work here, but look at that tomato. That's not quite completely ripened yet, but the size of this is amazing. I brought a measuring tape out here, actually. One sec. Alright, so there you go. So that's a solid 5.5 inch tomato in length. And let's see, in width, it's a solid 2.5. So, very nice sized tomato. These are super meaty inside and super tasty. I was not expecting these Roma tomatoes to be quite so tall and large in stature of the plant, I mean. But it's worked out. I adjusted and added the infrastructure to support them. I'm going to add some more wires in here in the next couple days and a couple more levels and do some more clipping up to keep them up off the ground and stabilize them. The reason I do the wires and posts is you see these cages are already starting to lean. They can't handle this fruit load after a certain point. It's too much weight and too much leverage, you know, because the plant comes out beyond the edges of the cage and they fall over. So I come through and I run these wires. I catch the top of the cage with the bottom wire going on the post, so we kind of help control the cage from falling all the way over, and that helps keep the tomatoes supported through the season as we clip and climb the levels up. Anyway, I just want to say these are excellent tomatoes. I probably will do an official review video on these in upcoming weeks, but if you're looking for a really nice tomato that's super meaty for making tomato sauces or any kind of cooking, like a paste tomato, these are awesome. Super meaty inside. In fact, I'll cut this one open for you quick. I was just here looking at these San Marzano Ridotta Italiano tomatoes, and I thought I would share some of these red Empress of India nasturtiums in the squash here. Beautiful bright red flower on them. Okay. Again, there's almost no water in these, like juice-wise. Like if I squeeze, you can see some comes out, but overall, there isn't a lot. Again, this one isn't completely ripe all the way yet, but man, look at that luscious, beautiful meat. The whole tomato is full of meat. There's not a lot of hollow area. Some tomatoes have quite a bit of hollow area, and so they look like more volume than they are. But these actually are what they say they are. Here's another one. This is off the shelf, a Crimson Cushion beefsteak. This is by no means anything anywhere near like the Crimson beefsteak I used to have. I actually grew some of these last summer. Wasn't super impressed. So probably not going to put those on the list. Now I'll try and dig up a picture here. There's some tomatoes that I saved from the store that came from a greenhouse out of Maine. I think they were Intergrow greenhouses. They were this nice uniform cluster of cherry tomatoes, and they were super, super candy sweet, which tells me that they had some degree of understanding on nutrition regarding tomatoes, and they selected a nice productive variety. So to that end, I've taken a couple of those seeds that I saved back last year, and I've dropped them into some soil here. Now, I didn't go through a lot of trouble to save them, so I don't know that they're actually going to be viable, but I thought I would try it, because if they are, they would make an excellent commercial production seed for me. And one of the advantages I have here in the grow lab is if I have a good thriving tomato plant, I can make clones or genetic copies of it or scion replication of it very easily here. I can walk over to a plant like this and take something like this and take a cutting of that, and in a week I can have that rooted, and in a month that plant can be, you know, 1.5 feet or 2 feet high, a thriving, robust tomato plant that could go out in the field and really take off. So I will demonstrate that in this series, and in fact I'll throw a flashback shot here too to the old aeroponics unit that I built back in early 2000s and did a lot of filming on in 2004 and 2005. And you'll see the tomatoes that I grew in the aeroponics system there. But also, I don't know if I have footage of it. If I can find it, I will share it. But I used to take the tomato plants out of the hydro unit, and I would take a clone of them and put that out in the garden, grow that out in the garden for the season. As fall came on and cold weather was starting to come, I would take a clone of that back into the hydro unit and root it in the hydro unit and grow that out through the season in the hydro unit. And I kept tomato plants going for, I don't know, I think 3 years was my record on that. And it was just because of life situations that I wasn't able to keep the hydro unit going. I ended up having to move. But my point is, if you have living, growing plant tissue and you know how to manipulate it, you can really do a lot with very...
This is my hydro unit. Been working on this for about 4 or 5 years now. I've managed to develop it up to an aeroponic fog system from what was originally an ebb and flow system. Originally I was just growing lettuce and having a hard time with that, and now I'm able to grow tomatoes, potatoes, broccoli, pretty much anything. There are numerous additional upgrades that I'm planning to do to it, but in the meantime, let me give you a little tour. Go left here, you'll see more green tomatoes growing, and you'll see that the quality of the plant life is really quite impressive in here. And I'll take you over to the other side of the hydro unit, and you can see more tomato plants. Imagine that. And yet another broccoli plant, which has not quite yet begun to develop a head, although it will soon. And up in the top you can see a tasty red tomato growing. By the way, these tomatoes that we've been eating out of here are like garden fresh, like literally like you picked them straight from the garden. All the nutrients are organic, and the hydro system is fully automated, with the exception of a nutrient and pH adjustment exchange, which is scheduled to be upgraded at some point when financing is available. I'm going to take you down and let you get a look at the root system now, and maybe you'd like to have a look at some nice fresh potatoes that are growing inside the hydro unit in the grow tubes. Better at what's going on inside of here, and you can see one of the fog emitters right there, which produces the fogging mist that keeps the roots and the nutrients and everything rolling. Right now we're using yogurt cups as knockout blocks for empty plant slots. This hydro unit is completely configurable. We're able to switch plants around in it to make more space, and to pull them out and transplant them to another location, whatever that location may be. Well, first let me give you a close-up view of a nice, ripe, juicy red tomato out of the hydro unit. And I'll hold it up and spin it around for the camera a little bit. You can see that it's looks like it just came straight out of the garden.
And so I'll show you going forward in this series just how much you can do with just how little, because we're going to propagate out from the lab here. We're going to start some stuff from seed here in the lab, and then we're going to go out into the field, and I'll show you out in the field also how we grow. And so what I'm going to try to do is demonstrate multiple different growing environments and situations across multiple different soils, so you can understand that the tools and concepts and principles and practices behind it all are really what drives success in the system. And that goes for quality tomato growing, but it goes for anything in regenerative agriculture. What really drives success is good knowledge and tools. And so that's what I intend to provide here on the Pharmacy Seeds Network for new learning farmers, gardeners, and even consumers, because even consumers need to understand the true value of nutrition. And if you go through my channel, you'll see I'm painting that picture very clearly. We're illustrating that out, and we're going to continue to do so throughout 2024 and beyond. And there are many new pieces working in the gears here coming that will help define that and make that directly available and easily discernible to the consumer. So lots of cool stuff happening. Meantime, we have some ripening Roma tomatoes. These are not a very good example of how big these tomatoes can actually get, these San Marzanos. These are tiny San Marzanos. And we got a little bit of that calcium enrot, see? So that's that calcium deficiency again. So there you go. I believe I've corrected that deficiency. We do have good, healthy new growth coming back now, but we're still waiting for that to play out. But again, I'll point out the healthy new growth, new flowers coming on and throwing everywhere. That goes across the board on all of these guys, and I've seen new growth start up again at the top of these, and these tomatoes are starting to swell again. So yeah, I think we got our deficiency issue tuned back in. And I think part of that was our environment here. I had turned the humidity down a little bit because things were a little too wet in here at one point. And I had not turned it back up. And I have recently, in the last 3 days or 4 days, I turned the humidity and the temperature back up in here a little bit. and that's made a huge difference in the tomato plant growth and everything else. So let's round it up. Start with good genetics, and then do everything you can to propagate those good genetics out. And then you have to gear those genetics for the environment you're working with and for what your goal is. You know, do you want a large beefsteak tomato? Would you prefer cherry tomatoes? Do you need something small that's got to fit on your deck and go in the blazing sun? That's a whole different variety of tomato. It's a whole different seed than something you want to stick in your garden and put up, 8-foot posts and let it climb 8-foot posts. You'll have tomatoes like that 8 feet off the ground. So it's just all factors to consider. And then so once you get all that sort of thing figured out, then you go back and you start good seed. And starting good seed is really simple, man. You got to start with good soil. I would say start with a good compost-based soil. Don't trust the bag. Figure out what your local supplier can give you, and then go look up online reviews in your local area. Ask other gardeners in your local area. Find out the truth about it. I've seen a lot of soils over the years. I've seen a lot of soils perform really well over the years, and then that company changes batches, and now that soil doesn't perform at all. So you really have to be weary. It's part of why I have gone to mixing my own stuff. I highly recommend, if you really want like a decent, simple starting base, you get the Kiss Organics mix like I talked about. I'll give you a shot of that here. There it is, the Kiss Organics nutrient pack. Now they make a smaller version of this if you're like a gardener or you just want a couple for your patio or something. You can scale all this. Again, it's all scalable. But these, like, this is a great starting point. I wouldn't say this is totally complete, but if you start here, you got a really good head start on nutrition for plants. And that goes across the board for most flowering and fruiting plants, I would say. I would be very careful putting anything that's not flowering and fruiting in here, like a lettuce or a lower nutrient demand crop might be too much for it. And I think that's part of why we had aphid issues on the lettuce later in its life in here in our first test run. So all things to consider. But yeah, I start with something like this. I buy ProMix BX. That's one of the few pre-mixed soil amendments I find seems to be pretty consistent. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but they seem to have it pretty consistent. Also, part of that is because it's not really amended with anything. It's basically just a mycorrhizal inoculant sphagnum peat moss mixed with a perlite. And so that gives us a medium base and an aggregate to give us a little bit of aeration. And it's simple and available locally for me. It's not what I'd prefer. I really would much prefer a much more robust soil profile, or even a geological soil profile like native soil, but that gets really heavy and awkward. So in the interest of portable containers in grow tents right now, we work with what we got. So we start with something like that, and then we add something like a Kiss Organics to it. For example, one of these crates like the corn is in here, 1 cup of the Kiss Organic amendment to that much soil. I mix it good with the soil. I let it sit minimum 2 weeks. Really like to let it cook a month or more. Longer is always better, but minimum 2 weeks. Then you got a good soil mix to start with. You start your seeds in that, and man, you really got an advantage. And even for seed starts, you could even go half a cup of this stuff. It doesn't need to be super strong. Remember that difference between how much nutrient a tiny little seedling needs versus what a bigger plant needs versus what a large plant needs. Dramatic. So you take those and you stick them in something small that you can monitor, control moisture, temperature, humidity, and all easily in. I used to have nice starter planters for this sort of stuff, but they aged over the years, and I recently chucked them, and solo cups were locally available and easy to get to, so that's what I grabbed. So these are SSC from 215. So that was store Super Sweet Cherry. That's from the Intergrow greenhouses, and I just dropped these seeds in here, so they may not have germed yet, or they may not germ. We'll find out. But yeah, starting something like that, we get a nice little seedling up and going. once we get up and going, before we get root bound, we go up to something bigger, and we try to keep that process of hopping out ahead going. That's if we're starting early. And honestly, ideally, let's just stop and talk about ideal seed starting conditions for tomatoes, because there's ideal and then there's what we do to play the line. We saw in the earlier part of the video and heard that tomatoes are native to South America. So let's just envision that we're in South America and it's, say, 85, 95, 100 degrees, 110, 115, and very humid. Very hot and very humid. The equatorial sun is blazing down on these plants. They're getting blasted with energy. They're surrounded by dense forests with all sorts of leaf matter and material and animal action going on, exchanging nutrients and soils all around it. All of that is settling into the soil underneath and feeding the soil food web underneath that plant, which, let's again remember, that is the digestive tract of the plant. So, all this incredible biological activity is going on all around it. Remember, this isn't in a container here. This is in a forest or an open field, any place it could find a spot to catch a little bit of sunlight and make its best attempt at yielding fruit and carrying its progeny forward. That's what we're talking about here. And so in a natural ecosystem, this plant would grow up, it would produce its fruit. Its fruit would get picked by a bird or an animal and eaten, or it would fall to the ground and rot very quickly in a humid environment, a warm, humid environment. Say it gets eaten. So, now, all that husk and hull has been removed, and what's left are these tiny little seeds. Let's take a closer look at those. As you look at this, at the tip of my finger now, and I zoom in, think about how fascinating that is. That all the coding that is necessary for the plant that we were just looking at to express itself and to produce a fruit as delicious as a tomato. And let me tell you, there's a huge difference when you have a tomato grown in a nutrient density program that's in a truly healthy program, as a truly healthy plant. They say a tomato's a fruit, right? I'll tell you what, you get a nutrient-dense tomato and all those fruity flavors come out, you realize the truth is a tomato is a fruit. But back to seed. So, all those tiny little seeds are covered in that gel like I showed you. That seed goes into the digestive tract of an animal or sits out on the soil surface where it's moist and damp, and it decays. It starts to rot. And the really good tomato seed producers know that you don't take that off. Instead, you ferment the seed in moisture and let that gel break down, and then you rinse the seed, and then you store the seed after drying it. And that's how you preserve the entire embryo as best you can, including the microbiology that is in and on that seed. And Dr. James White talked at great length on John Kemp's podcast, Advancing Eco-Agriculture, about that and about how much that affects seed quality, nutrient density, genetics, epigenetics, breeding, and so on and so forth. So let's always keep in mind that we're trying to mimic a native environment. And in doing so, that's why we go through all the trouble of germinating, as we talked about, carrying that germ plasm, that microbial community, really. It's not just a seed, it's actually a microbial community. It's a little planet Earth, a mini planet Earth, if you really want to consider it in an appropriate perspective. we're taking that little planet Earth and we're plugging that into a soil structure, and we're trying to make sure that all those seed pieces are there. The seed, as completed and as well grown as it can be, complete and filled with nutrient density as it was formed on the vine, and then from there properly propagated, including its microbiome, because the microbiome is important. I'm not going to stop talking about this. It's important in humans, plants, and animals, and it's really the key to whether or not we unlock nutrition and health, or whether we have sicknesses and diseases and problems. So I just wanted to paint a little bit deeper picture on that, and I'm going to try to do that on my channel here more, and in this series especially. Let's always go back to the native environment we're trying to mimic, and then just remember that as we go forward. So that takes us back to why we germinate the soil, not just the seed, but we're germinating the whole soil, that whole plug of soil. We look at that as a community of microbes, and we're germinating that petri dish, if you will, of microbes along with that plant to support that plant, and that plant to support them. They can never be separated. They can never be separated. They can never be separated. So ideal seed starting conditions. Ideal, we would start our tomato seed directly in the soil we're going to grow it in. Preferably that would be outdoor soil, a nice geologic rich profile, rich with basalt and granite microfines deep in the soil geology. That would give us a great array of trace minerals and calcium and zinc and phosphorus and potassium and all those pieces we need. And we would start those seeds directly outside in the soil and grow them in the best environmental conditions that they really like right from the get-go, right? That's the best yield potential we could give that plant. But then we run into the problem, like here in upstate New York, we're at 42 north latitude, zone 5B, and we have the problem of our frost period. We don't even get over official frost date ends May 20th in the springtime. So that means we can't even put a tomato seedling out until May 20th. And then if we put a seed out May 20th, that soil's still cold. That's not even going to germinate. So now we got to wait until really like June 10th before we have ground temps that are warm enough where a seed will germinate in the soil. So we start at June 10th with a 90-day variety. Where do you think we end up? Yeah, well, we don't germinate for 7 to 21 days. Call it 7. So now we're out to, say, June 15th. Now we're starting at June 15th, and to even get to our first tomato is 90 days out. So June, July, August, September 15th before we have our first tomato. You see the problem here? Because now, here in upstate New York, October 20th is your frost date in the fall. So roll back a month, guess what? It's getting cold already. Now you're losing growth. Even in the beginning of September you're losing growth because it's cold overnight. Some of your plant growth, most of your plant growth happens between 4 and 8 a.m. Okay, so now you're getting cold overnight. It's cold between 4 and 8 a.m. because that's when everything's cooled down and the sun hasn't warmed it up yet. So now you're losing 80% of your growth in that target range. So now you got to roll back into summer to get any growth. So where do you really end up harvesting your first tomato? Well, you really end up harvesting your first tomato October 1st, and it's likely your last tomato as well. So, now that you understand the context of why we're not starting tomatoes directly from seed outdoors, that's why we start indoors, and then that's why we try not to limit that seed's potential. And that means reducing all the potential stress points that we could put on that seed. And that means things like, right from the get-go, making sure it has all the nutrition that it needs right available, present in and on the seed, as well as the biology. That is equally as important, if not more important, than the nutrition. Because remember that biology pairs with that soil, and when that biology pairs with that soil, that keeps that nutrient exchange going on with the plant. And the plant is providing energy coming from the photosynthetic process and sending out exits and sugars and feeding the microbial community. And the microbial community is extracting and mining minerals and nutrients for the plant and sending those back to the plant. we want to germinate that entire process. Not just the seed, we're germinating a whole biological process. And that's a very important point. So, once we get that biological process going, we want to facilitate everything we can to keep it going and not limit its growth. So, as that seed starts to grow, now we start to outgrow the space, and that's limiting the growth potential of the plant. With tomatoes, that's particularly as the roots go out this way, because tomato plants tend to send lateral roots out rather than vertical roots. So, very quickly you can see in this narrow diameter, we're starting to limit its growth. Now it will go out and shoot down, and that's sort of a compensation, but remember, every time we limit its potential, we're limiting its total potential for yield, and we're reducing its yield capacity by limiting its total genetic potential and the expression that it could produce had we given it the perfect environment from A to Z. So, I think that's a pretty good place to leave off for now. You need to understand that seed quality is super important, seed selection is super important, and then seed propagation from A to Z on out is super important. And then, of course, appropriate macro and mineral nutrition as well as biology. I hope that you can take these points home and grow some awesome tomatoes with me. If not this year, then certainly by next year after you've seen the whole process run through. Alright, I think that's good for now. I've babbled on certainly plenty long enough. I hope you found this interesting or informative. Thanks for watching the Pharmacy Seeds Network, and I hope you join us for the next episode in the series, Quality Tomato Production.